Yeah, I'd like to go ahead and open this up to comments from council. I do have a couple comments I'd like to make first, if I may. And Mr. Nyoff, you had quoted something from the State Lands Commission that we cannot build on that. It is prohibited to be developed, as has been said in the past by members of the group. Could you please delve into that a little bit more in detail?
Could you go back to that very first slide? And Claudia may know the agreement better than I, but I will simply say, as we evaluated, it's again with state lands, so public trust lands for purposes of a park opens to the general public. So that's an agreement we have with the state. So in other words, in essence, you'd have to get the state to approve. If you're ever going to not use it for these purposes, you have to get the state to approve that. And its intent was never that. Our specific plan says it's open. It's supposed to be open space lands. But this agreement, it doesn't make it impossible. You'd have to get the state to agree to develop the property. I highly doubt that would occur. And so that's what that says. And I don't know if the city attorney Quintana wants to add to that.
I'd like to make a quick comment to that, if I may, before Ms. Quintana, and that is when Mr. Nyoff, when you and I spent some time with the U.S. Forest Service, one of the recommendations that they had made to us was that we should be looking at and I had the title written down here, a conservation easement for the property. And you and I talked about that with those folks, and I would really want us to explore that. That would prohibit any kind of building on that property. And Ms. Quintana, I believe that I've spoken to you about it also. I don't know what the process would be to do that, but I, as a resident that enjoy the preserve, do not want to see any kind of building on that property. I want to see it remain open space and open to the public, as we have been discussing here the past few minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, there are a number of documents that touch upon this particular issue, and they all have to do with what kind of use is allowed. So the public trust doctrine says that particular lands are to be used for things that are consistent with the public trust doctrine, and there's a complete statute that says what zones can be used for what. The settlement agreement with the city of Vallejo has this particular language that when it was conveyed to the city of Vallejo, it was thought at the time that it was going to be for this use. The city of Vallejo now owns this land, but it's still, again, for purposes of a park open to the general public. I think even stronger than the conveyance document, which is the language that's being referenced here, is what it's zoned. So as you know, all the land in the city of Vallejo is zoned for particular purposes. And this particular purpose is zoned as a park. So anything that would have to be changed would have to come to the council. If somebody wanted to build condos, do anything other than what it's currently zoned for, it would need to be acted on by the council. Nobody could do it surreptitiously. Yes, there could be a further process to make this into some kind of conservation easement that would be superimposed on what the land use is to make doubly, triply sure that it would not be done for any other purpose. I think in our conversation, I think I related to you, I don't actually think it's needed because already the public trust doctrine ensures that this is only used for park purposes, and your own zoning ordinance and the general plan make sure that this is only used for park purposes. So you already have 3, perhaps even 4 documents if you're counting the settlement agreement that say this is just going to be used for park purposes. So that's what I know about this particular piece of land.
Again, I wish to explore that, Mr. Nyoff, that we do make a real effort in finding out what a conservation easement would do for that property. You and I have talked about it at great length. In fact, we talked about it this afternoon at our one-on-one. And I'm adamant about exploring the conservation easement for the protection of that piece of property. So if we could, I want to continue with that, please.
And Mr. Mayor, and I know Councilmember Meissner just brought it up at the last meeting as well, and most of you, I think, have all indicated there's without a shadow of a doubt this property you want to insure. So I think, as the city attorney said, it's got layers of cover now, but you know what? I would suggest we proceed with that, just because we want to. People still are talking, zoning laws can change, right? That's why people put yet behind my quotes of no development. There's always something that could happen, but that goes on on the property, a conservation trust. And I don't think there's anybody in this room, nor I also know that anybody is a major landowner on Mare Island would want to ensure that this land gets preserved. And so I think everybody in this room, and I would highly recommend we proceed with that. So if council's okay, we'll proceed with something and present it to you, the city attorney's office, and myself, and we'll bring it forward to you to put a conservation easement on this property. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Just a couple other little things. We erred when we used the herbicide, as we all agreed to. My hope is that we won't be doing that in the future, that we will use mechanized means, manual means, or some other process other than using herbicides on the property. I did have a conversation with Jason Lacey, and Jason was telling me that they're exploring the use of pre-emergence to keep the weeds from coming back. That I use pre-emergence in my garden. It's a very safe product, and I think it's something that we could look at for the weed growth out on the preserve. There was a gentleman that spoke earlier, I believe it's Mr. Brake, who talked about nest platforms. Because of the loss of trees and the possibility that we may lose more due to their condition, I would encourage us to look at those nesting platforms for the different birds that require that have lost their homes. I know we have some for the ospreys that are out there, the egrets. So if we can explore that when we use these experts that we're employing to say where these should be placed, how they should be placed. I know there's some on some of the gantries, some of the towers that are out there on the island, and I just want to make sure that we reinforce that and add as many as needed due to the loss of the ones that we had currently. And lastly, the trees. There was that number of 124 trees. Terrence, you said, they could be anywhere from, you counted trees as anything from a little tree that is maybe 2 inches in diameter up to 100-footer. And those were all trees. And hence, I think that number was inflated because folks are thinking that 124 trees were all the big ones, but they aren't. Is that correct?
Yes, Mayor. The arborist that did the assessment, they GPS all of the trees. And one of the techniques when they do large assessments like this is they group trees in bands. In many instances, certain species will tend to kind of grow together and compete. So in some instances, you may have acacia trees that kind of grow next to each other, into each other. And so some of these areas of the 124, some of those are groups of trees. And many of them are small acacia trees.
Thank you. And lastly, the bird viewing event. I really want us to pursue that. That has been very popular in this community. And as we do pursue it, I would like us to talk to Myrna. Maybe she would like to participate in it as a motion of goodwill. I get it. This hasn't been easy for her. We have all listened to her passion. And she's had a lot of passion for the past 12, 13 years that she's managed that property. Granted, we've had our issues with how it should be managed and the issues of insurance, safety, public safety, so forth, were paramount for us. And that's why we came about this whole thing, was because of are issues of liability. But when it comes time to look at this bird viewing festival, this Audubon festival, whatever it is we're going to call it, that we incorporate some of Myrna's knowledge as a spirit of goodwill and a spirit of trust between the residents of Vallejo. Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
just a quick comment, because you mentioned the use of herbicides, and I do think, I have admitted all along, we've made some land management mistakes. At least they weren't intentional from people, but they didn't know what expectations there were to manage that land. So one of the things we want to do here is we want to come to an agreement with whoever wins the RFQ when it comes to managing it, to manage the operations of the preserve consistent with this plan and its goals and visions for what we want to preserve and protect, but as well as fire safety, building safety, and everything else, and come up with a plan. I think people who know and watch what's going on here, from time to time, we would think we needed to do something, remove a tree. Even when we needed to open it up for fires, there was a lot of controversial. Why did you need to do that? Why did you not? We want to use someone to help us create that land management plan long term. And not only that, we're going to look at it for the preserve, for what its uses are, for the next 200 acres, for what its uses are. We're also going to look at some of these areas like Alden Park, where, hey, with fires running into Glen Cove neighborhoods, into their backyards, up to their house. Because the whole fire danger is a great concern to me, that's not going away. And so we want to actually not only do the preserve here, but we want to move it beyond that. So I will tell you, as long as Terrence is here and I'm here, we're not putting herbicides on the preserve. And we shouldn't need to do it unless there's some really devastating reason to do that something else is devouring the preserve. We're going to mow it, which is what we did in July to take care of that. But again, the land management plan is one of the areas that always seem to come up on whatever Facebook posts or whatever. You're taking a tree down, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're mowing this. We want a plan that says whoever we work with in the future, this is what we expect you to do. And here's the land management plan. So there's none of this question and people going back and forth. This is why we did it. This is why we did it. You shouldn't have done it. This is damaged. We want to come up with a plan that we can put in the RFQ that says this is how it's going to be done. So we shouldn't see any of that same type of sometimes back and forth that we saw in the past year. Thank you.
Thank you. Lastly, I want to thank you and your staff for putting this report together. The residents of our community needed to hear this. There's a lot of important material that we covered tonight. One thing I'd like to see, Mr. Nyoff, is at least monthly in your newsletter that's online, or in the information section of our agenda, that you or one of your staff members reports out on the status of the preserve, where we're going, what we're doing, what we've accomplished over the months. This is an excellent start. Our residents are full of rumors because they're not getting any information. So now this is an excellent start to getting that information out to Vallejo. So I'm asking that we do this at least monthly, and if something comes up that's big and important, that we mention it during our information section of the calendar.
Yep, agree, Mayor. We talked about preparing a page, so I wanted to take information from here. I kind of drafted something I was going to post actually today, but I wanted to hear the comments here to see if I couldn't add some more to that, and then we'll post something. We'll have a Mare Island Preserve page, and we'll be updating regularly, try to do frequently asked questions. So we'll be following up on that.
And to the members of the audience that are here in support of Myrna, if you do have questions, address them to us. You know, I see the Facebook posts. I see the rumor, the speculation, the ill-received comments, and that doesn't help anything. It doesn't help anything at all. All it does is make council, staff puzzled about what the real intent is. There have been so many comments that have been so negative about this, about staff, about the city council, that it's, quite frankly, it's angering to hear that they have accused, excuse me, that Nimitz has been accused of starting the fire, that they were the ones that cut down the power poles, that they did this so that they could build $1 million homes. You know, it's just beyond me that those types of comments would be made. So I think we're at a real good point now where we, as a city, can put out factual information monthly, and you can send us your comments. So with that, I have other council members. Councilmember Meissner.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a whole bunch of questions that sort of, as I was hearing people talk in the presentation, so let me go through this and see if we can look at some of these things. So I want to start off with the RFQ. So I guess it's never been published. I guess, as I understand, I thought it was, but it hasn't been released yet. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, and why is that the case? I made a decision that while Myrna and the trust had camping reservations, I didn't want to do that during the summer, so I didn't want to open that up. And then so September we started trying to finalize that, and the fires hit, and so we just haven't got to it yet. But certainly we want to do a community meeting, which we did, which some of the speakers were at here tonight, and we got a whole list of things which actually are very close to it. So no, we haven't put it out there yet. It's probably going to be 45, maybe 60 days before we actually get that out there.
Okay. And then I did find the staff report was from May 28th. And so that's probably a good description of, it's similar to what was in the presentation. So it's a good description of what we're looking for, what was outlined in that report. And an RFQ is really, so as I understand, it's a request for qualifications, not proposals. So people that are qualified to run a piece of property that's that size and growing. So that's accurate.
Yeah, and it's that next phase, exactly correct, is we want people that can help develop funding strategies for the buildings and for maintenance, and certainly be able to do some of the maintenance that we are required to do to keep it safe. So absolutely, we want to make sure their books are in good order, all the things I mentioned before. So we want qualified applicants, correct.
Well, it reminds me, so there's been comparisons with the Mare Island Heritage Trust, with Vallejo Community Arts Foundation running the Empress. But the Vallejo Community Arts Foundation has been working with that building since they took it on, with no help from the city until last year. Not 1 ounce of help. And so they've been raising funds, and so that's a kind of partner. So maybe there's funds that the city can offer to the preserve or whoever runs it, but really that's the kind of relationship we're looking for, somebody who can run it and raise the funds through the nonprofit status. I mean, these are relationships that, as a nonprofit manager, when I worked for the AIDS Foundation, the city of San Francisco, we raised a lot of private money. And actually, we raised much more private money than we ever got from the city and county of San Francisco. So these are the kind of relationships that the cities always look for. Nonprofits have much more flexibility than cities. That's one of the reasons why cities always look to nonprofits to run these kinds of programs. So, let's see.
While you're thinking, can I just add to that? So you're right, and there was a question about where's the city been on taking care of these facilities. So just like you just mentioned, first year you ever added some money to the Empress. So when you came out of bankruptcy, you didn't have any money.
Mm-mm.
And really, money is still not here to bring the level of service that we want. But what you did do is you built the reserves. So each year, we just talked about there's funding left over for the past year. So it's one-time funding. So that's exactly what we're going to put into the reserve, is the funding we just talked about out of this money, which is the same thing you did for the Empress. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how it is. It's not operating funding. It's when you have one-time funding. And it was only possible because you had to save for multiple years here in order to build your reserves back, do equipment replacements and so forth. So that's the only reason now you're able to do it. And fortunately, I happen to be the new city manager that gets to come in and says, you can go ahead and spend some of this money on the preserve, on the arts and that type of thing. Thank you.
And then, people have been saying that the preserve, or it's like any sort of open space that's owned by the public, that you sort of enter at your own risk. And so really there's no liability per se. Can you describe a little bit about that? I mean, I've heard that over and over again, that there's really no liability. So maybe our city attorney can talk about that.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Meisner. Yes, I think I've heard some of the same comments. And I wish I could say there was no liability, but sadly, about a third of our cases have to do with premises liability, which basically turns into if the city is a property owner and there is a dangerous condition on the property, then a potential plaintiff who is hurt on the property will look to the city to recover for damages for their injury. So that's the basic rule of law with regard to premises liability on the city. And as I said, we do have a number of those cases, and that is one of those concerns. There's also the matter of a potential trail immunity defense, which if the injury happens on trail and if somebody is on a trail and they get injured on the trail, there's a potential defense there. But that by no means covers all the types of injuries that could happen on the preserve. And especially because in one of the speakers actually asked this as a question, the city is actually not covered for any type of accident that could happen over there that might result in a lawsuit. Normally, the city does require tenants to carry insurance that would make the city a covered party under that insurance. But in this particular case, we do not have insurance that covers the city for any kind of injury that would happen. Normally, what happens is an insurance document looks to the contract, the underlying contract that would require the tenant to carry that liability insurance. But for this particular piece of property, there is no underlying contract. So the insurance that the preserve actually has, even though it says for any injury that may happen, insurance always looks to the contractual requirements. And for that reason, the city is not covered under any type of insurance should there be an accident or lawsuit that results. Thanks.
So the preserve would be covered for any liability, but the city, if somebody got injured, they could go after the city. We wouldn't be covered.
That's correct.
Okay. Let's see. So we already talked a little bit about, the mayor mentioned Nimitz and some of these accusations. I did hear that there were public requests for information, that there's been discussions about with Nimitz over the past few, earlier, I guess over the year since they've been interested in Mare Island development. So maybe you can share a little bit about what, what those discussions might have been about, as much as you can, because I know that if anybody who's been to their presentations, and I wish that people would go to these presentations because they're very informative. This is a kind of developer that I think we've always wanted. They don't want to plop a cement plant on the Sperry Mill. They don't want to plop an LNG plant. They want to work with the community to develop all of Mare Island, which has been something that this city's always wanted ever since the Navy pulled out, to look for that island to be developed for housing, jobs, and recreation. So they always show the preserve on their maps as something a very important feature to all of the city. And so then, as far as I know, that they have no interest in developing, or we don't have any interest in developing the preserve, and they don't either. But if you can share anything that you might be able to about those conversations.
Well, in the course of being a city manager, you have conversations with businesses that aren't in the public's eye regularly, but I actually think that their presentations are more informative to the public than my few meetings I've had with them. They have said, every HOK, everybody that's come visited the island associated with Nimitz Group has said it is a critically important part of the development of the island is to preserve the wetlands, all of those areas around the bay, the refuge that's there. Those are critically important to the enjoyment of life. They are draws to have people want to live there, bring business there. They are marketing tools. That preserves a marketing tool as it is. And so those are the only conversations. And if there's an email out there that says something different, I would love to get a copy of who's saying that, and what conversation's happening, that there would be some type of development on the preserve. I will say this: I was at the intermodal, the classroom, at their grand opening or their reception. They build classroom buildings next to Factory OS, and there is an absolutely beautiful classroom with windows, and it's got panels on it that you can do informational items on. And I did talk to Nimitz about how awesome that would look like as a visitor center at the preserve, where people could get education information that's open and glass. And we talk about how do we preserve it and how do we make it more enjoyable use than what it is today. Those are the kind of conversations we're having about the preserve. How do you ensure that it's preserved, and how do we make it better for the enjoyment of everyone? Whether you live on Mare Island, you live in Vallejo, or you live anywhere on the globe. So those are the only conversations we've had.
Mm-hmm. And when we were talking about insurance, I'm going to go back to insurance. I just want to make so I know there's snakes out there, because the last time I was out there, a snake was about as far away as Vice Mayor Dew from me, and a rattlesnake. And so I cautiously skirted around it. And so I also saw when I was out there that they're western bunkers that are cut into the hill. They're semicircular. The acoustics are really interesting. If you know where I'm talking about, it's and it's hard to get to. That's really steep and whatnot. So I think what people don't realize is, so we know there's rattlesnakes out there. There's camping happening there in these areas that are really difficult to access, and those are the reasons why we need fire access or emergency access to people. If they're out there, it's public land. This goes back to the insurance. So certainly somebody who's out there that gets bit by a rattlesnake and we can't provide emergency services, I hate to say this in public, but that's a lawsuit ready to happen. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yes, there are many, many concerns, is all I can say, about having that piece of property accessible at this moment.
Mm-hmm. And then, speaking of camping, I was also told that the city actually did allow the preserve for camping. So I think our chief was here, our fire chief. I think he might have left. Shoot! Oh, is he just outside? Oh, he got a call.
That's fortunate timing for him, right? To not have to answer. So I did, obviously it occurred. Mm-hmm. And I think the chief did respond when you asked. I saw that, and his answer was, no, we didn't. But what we did do was we said it was no camping, but I said let it go until the camping season's basically over, till the weather changes, till the end of September, actually till Labor Day. So I said just don't enforce it until the camping season's over. We've been trying to say we don't want to, take away from what is already on the schedule. So let's wait till the time it gets rainy season. There's not as much camping that goes on. So that is where we did allow that to go on for a couple months after we had posted it.
Okay. I don't think I have any. So I just. I think all of us, everyone here, all can agree that we want the preserve to stay a preserve. I do like this idea of a conservation easement because, in 2002, the state public trust lands, that was also the same year that the liquefied natural gas was proposed. And I think part of that might have been on the preserve, or maybe it was just the Navy property. Yeah, but it was down there on the southern part of. So council there can always be a change to what zoning is. And so for us that won't be here in 50 years. Maybe some of us are young enough. I don't think I will be. But this is important to say, this is going to be in perpetuity. So a conservation easement, I think, would really say, the city is committed to this open space forever. And so I don't know if it's sort of weird to do a conservation easement on your own property, because normally that's something that an agency would pay a private owner to pay them the loss of using their land for whatever they might want to use in the future. So, but it sounds like it can be done. So I would really appreciate that if we do a conservation easement, and I think that'll just give people the confidence that in 50 years it won't happen, or 100 years. So.
We'll probably have to find a partner, but I don't, again, that's a conversation that needs to happen. We've done conservation easements before, and there are some partners that we've worked with before, but you're right, somebody's going to have to be the beneficiary.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, that's cool. And I think, we see things on Facebook, right? And I've sort of always seen things posted about the preserve and what's going on, and the city has absolutely no agreement with the Mare Island Heritage Trust, and vice versa. There's never been any agreement. The things that have happened out there have all been completely under the control of the Mare Island Heritage Trust. And so I had some concerns when I got elected in 2014 that I was seeing campfires out there, posts about campfires or parties in the bunkers. And there's all the things that we know about the preserve anyway. There's risks out there. There's that reservoir that I always love to go over, and that's pretty dangerous too. And there's actually infrastructure that's really old that if you step on it, the thing will just crumble and you'll fall into the reservoir. And it's just open. So there's a lot of risks out there. So I was concerned. I was concerned that there was no agreement. There's no agreement. The city has no say right now in what's happening. So we really need that agreement. And so we also need. This is a large piece of public property. These are public. Whatever's generated out there are public dollars because this is public property. We have to make sure this is maintained for all of the city. Make sure that it's managed properly, and it's not. That doesn't mean that it hasn't been. It just means that you can't have an agreement with somebody because you like them. We have to have an agreement because it's the best agreement that the city can get. Just like we did, we do RFQs, RFPs for Wells Fargo. We see them all the time, and so really, this is such an important piece of property that. It does need an RFQ. It needs an RFP process. We just can't do it because this happens to be our friend. I mean, if it were somebody that we didn't like, I'm not going to name any names, but like the proverbial good old boys. If it was somebody we didn't like, we would be up in arms that the city just had this, like the $1 a year lease for 50 years the city used to do. Those are not good practices. Government practices. So I totally support the RFQ process. People can go to the May 28th agenda, and on page 707, it talks about the RFQ. And so I know that people are concerned about who that might go to. What I would say is rather than posting petitions online on Facebook and saying things or spreading rumors, people really need to help rally around the Mare Island Heritage Trust. Help them make sure that they are the robust nonprofit that we need to run the preserve, or partner. And I don't know, people have mentioned that there's all these Navy buildings that are now going to have to be managed, and how is that going to be done? And so maybe, I don't know if there's possibility to have two partners. Maybe the Mare Island Trust could partner with somebody else, or there's endless opportunities. And I think people should get together and try to make the best proposal, find partners. That is really the way forward, because we definitely need a nonprofit manager with agreements that say these are the things that are allowable, and I think that that allowable versus unallowable should be maybe something that we have community meetings about. Because I've had complaints about people don't like the camping, people do like the camping, people don't like the lights, people do like the lights. The dogs are out there. I've got complaints that there's dogs allowed off leash out there that other people with dogs on leashes don't like because there gets to be this aggression. So really, I think this is the right path forward. And I also want to put it out there that as we did with hiring our new police chief, that maybe we have some community input when we get the proposals, so that we've got community input to see, what's the best path forward to help us choose. So with that, I am done. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Suga.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also is in agreement to make sure that this piece of property stays as an open land, as a preserve. And we have to do everything that we can as a city to make sure that that happened and is documented for future leaders of our city, be it the conservation easement or something else. That will make sure that that piece of land will stay as a public land, open space, preserved. There were some statements earlier. I think one statement mentioned about the secret meeting between staff and Mr. Finney. I don't know what that statement is for. Did it happen?
If I find out what that secret meeting, again, so there are meetings that occur between the city manager and developers and business people. And so to call it a secret meeting, yes, I've met with Dave Finney on several occasions, but the context to that, any conversations we've ever had have been about preserving the preserve. And honestly, a conversation with him about how displeased he is to be targeted by some of this information that he wants to do something to develop that piece of property. That conversation did happen on a Saturday. Mm-hmm. And so I think if you want to know the secret meeting, the only one I had with just him and I was that phone conversation after he was able to see some of the stuff that's been in print about him and the preserve. And it was not a pleasant conversation about the untruthfulness of those comments and those posts.
Thank you. I'm glad it's on the open now. See, the one of the speakers had questions about or mixed news about us doing the festival. I think it's a gentleman from Sierra Club who get conflicting information about the Navy letting us use that for the festival or not. What's the truth about it? Is that, are we able to operate the festival?
Well, I think Myrna's comments were absolutely correct when it comes to the name, and it would be a different name for the event, but we certainly would. It's a great event. It's got the tours, it's got the walks. Certainly, I think it's been asked if there's something that we can have an additional conversation. She canceled it, and she has every right to do that, as she indicated. That's, she's got the trademark for that. But we think it's a great community event, and so we wanted to try to bring the partners together and bring people together to hold it again in the same light that she did. So certainly, I'm guessing we'll have a conversation after this meeting, next few days.
But the Navy will let us do that?
What's that?
The Navy will let us go through their properties?
Yeah, I'm not sure what, I don't know every single thing that happens here. So all I do know is today I got the information that they were working with the Navy to get that. So I will follow up tomorrow and see if there was something earlier that happened with the Navy that said we're not going to allow that. I do know that there was earlier conversations about that we wouldn't be opening the preserve in early February because we're not going to be done with the work that we think we need to do. And so there was that. So I don't know. I'm not aware of those conversations, but they may have occurred. So I'll follow up and find out.
Yes.
But I will say that as of today, those conversations were Aaron was all things Mare Island, was working with the Navy to see what we could do to get those Navy lands opened back up.
Yeah, and the rattlesnake, somebody confirmed with me that some gentleman from the group that is refurbishing the cemetery have seen some rattlesnakes. In fact, they showed it to Will, I think, Will Murat. So that danger is there. It's not, we can discard that. So it's important that we take care of that danger as well when we come on to operate the preserve. That's important. And I agree with the mayor. There's a lot of experience on the Flyway Festival. I agree with the mayor, ignoring about most of the things that we experience. Myrna has a good experience on the festival and her group. And if I think it's important that we ask her if she wants to help us operate the festival. This guy, he probably have a lot of contacts to go to the festival, and for us to be successful, we probably need the expertise that she gained for the last 20, 25 years in running the Flyway Festival, and I wouldn't mind her participating in the operation of the festival this year. So I hope the staff will consider tapping our expertise in operating the Flyway Festival. And but anyway, thank you for the presentation. I agree with my fellow council members and the mayor have stated about the preserve. And like I said, I wish that it will be a preserve for perpetuity. And I agree. I trust that. I know that the city manager is also in that concept, as far as I know. So, thank you, and appreciate all your effort in making it a safe public trust of public land for our citizens to enjoy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Nyhoff, thank you for agreeing to hold this meeting. I think we can all see how desperately it was needed, and it has aired quite a few concerns and I think cleared the air quite a bit as well. I want to commend my colleagues for their suggestions as to how to move forward with this, and I want to try to build on that, I think, as well. We're all concerned, of course, about the Flyway Festival or the Bird Festival or whatever you want to call it in February. And Myrna, of course, does operate as a nonprofit. She does have a board, the Mare Island Historical Trust. You have the authority as a city manager to enter into contracts for different performance venues, such as the Mad Hatter. And I would encourage you to reach out, maybe you're personally yourself or through Slater, to have discussions with the Mare Island Heritage Trust about undertaking the holding of this event for February of 2020. Because I would hate to see it miss a cycle. I think when you miss a cycle for a nonprofit event of this nature, you basically put yourself about 5 years back in the development process, and I would not like to see that occur. You have mentioned that the preserve would not be open until at least February of 2020. It would be open when it was safe to do so. Are you in a position to give us an outside date by which you can represent to the citizens of this community when that preserve will be open? Because that's a major concern for all of us in this community.
So I wasn't overly excited about the dates he just gave me. So what, the big issue is getting the people in to remove the trees, and it would be mid-April. We've got to come to you in January to ask you to allocate the funds to do the work, and so it would probably be March before we could actually get in there and do the work. So let's see if we can expedite that. Or I'll send you all an email. Let me get with Terrence and give you the earliest date we might be able to get it. I think April is too far out. And so want to talk to him about at least by the end of March, but I'll send that to you. I don't want to give a date without consulting with him in detail.
Of course, I certainly want to see it continue to move forward on a progressive and steady basis, no matter what, that it doesn't get pushed aside because of other projects. One of the things that we did when I was with the Forest Service was we had vendors come in and bid on salvage rights to property, to burned areas. And there's an awful lot of burned trees that can be salvaged and sold for income. I would encourage the city to look at that, and if those funds do appear, to dedicate them to the improvement of the preserve area as well. How many of those 124 trees, I do not know, but some of them might be salvageable and realize some return on the lumber themselves. And following up on that area of the land, when you mentioned the 124 acres of open space on the south end of Mare Island and parcel 7A, does that also include those buildings which are currently locked off and not accessible to the public, bordering the Napa River as well? Because there are a number of fairly significant buildings out there, but have not been open to the public since the island closed. So when you identify 124 acres, are you including that area as well, or is that something to be added into the preserve area?
I'm gonna guess. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to that. So no. So if it's, you're talking like across the cemetery on the by the Napa River side,
Right.
That I don't think that area's been cleaned up yet, so it hasn't been transferred over yet. So it will be a future transfer. The area I think we're going to see next is on the bay side. All of those, I think we anticipate those pretty soon. But those multiple buildings, those houses on the other side aren't. I'm 90% sure they're not part of the 124 acres.
Okay, because those buildings in that parcel along the Napa River present a significant potentiality for development and enhancement of water access, maybe some commercial activities. There's an awful lot that could be done with that strip of land. And while we're looking at moving the preserve forward, I would like to see us give some consideration about the development or use of that property as we move forward, rather than just ignoring it for another 4 to 5 years. I think that's part of the whole key process. It's something that the public is quite concerned over, and I think I would not like to see it delayed for 4 to 5 years and just have people speculate as to what will take place. Okay, one of the things I would ask of you also is that when the request for qualifications comes about, as all the council members have indicated and seen it happen, is that before we finalize it, that proposal be presented to the council for discussion as to what should or should not be in that proposal. Because I think it's essential that we have some communication in this area between staff and council to see how we feel, and indeed hear from the community as to how they feel about how this request for proposals should actually be materialized. So rather than coming out and saying, here it is, I would like to see some dialogue prior to the finalization of that process. Has there been any discussion between your office and the county about the potentiality of including the preserve in the regional park system that the county is hopefully considering to go forward with?
I have had one conversation with the county in regards to this, and talking to them about whether they were going to establish that and go out for a ballot question, but that was probably 3 months ago. I haven't had a conversation since. So again, I think that might be a very great opportunity to get some secured funding for that facility. So yes, I have requested a conversation with that, assuming they're going to go forward with this whole park initiative.
Okay, well, I would encourage that to take place because I would like to see a coordinated effort on the improvement and enhancement of this entire area. And I do encourage us to work with the Mare Island Heritage Trust to the extent that we possibly can. They have gained an awful lot of knowledge and experience over the 25 years they've been out there. And indeed, the city basically handed them the keys and said, go do what you can do. And they've done a commendable job. In fact, I, for one, at least, would have to single out Myrna Hayes as being somebody who should be recognized and indeed honored for her efforts out there. She has been a stalwart member of this community for many years, involved in many other activities that have enhanced the improvement of this city, including the retention of the ferry, being one of the original members on the Mare Island Restoration Advisory Board. She has given and given and given. I think it's actually quite proper time for this city to give her one of those commendations and awards and recognitions that we give before we get into community forum. It's long overdue, and I would encourage and indeed ask the mayor's office to write such a declaration to recognize her. It would also go, I think, a long ways towards improving the relationship that was allowed to deteriorate over the last several years. So again, I applaud your efforts at coming out into this meeting. I think it has addressed many issues, resolved a lot of issues. I am sorry to hear about the rumors on social media, which is why many of us don't pay much attention to them. But nonetheless, they are in existence, and they need to be handled or managed as a city manager must do. So I encourage us to move forward on this. I think we can adopt a much better product here. And in time, I think we will have something that we will all be very, very proud of. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. First off, I do want to thank Mare and everyone who's worked to preserve the Mare Island Preserve and make sure it stays going and everything that's going on over there. That being said, moving forward, one thing I would like to see in that RFQ is a plan to create, I'd like to hear what is the plan to ensure that there is diversity, and diversity, I mean in age, working class families, low-income families in the city of Vallejo. Most people in Vallejo don't know about the Mare Island Preserve. My little sister's here visiting, and she was frustrated. She loves nature walks. She'd never heard of it. I would love to see us work with an organization that has a plan to reach out to our schools, have a plan to make sure that our kids are part of the Mare Island Preserve on a regular basis, on a permanent basis, because just word of mouth, the average kid in South Vallejo, North Vallejo, East Vallejo, you name it, they're not on Mare Island Preserve, and they don't have access, and there has been no outreach to them. And so I think that needs to change as we're talking about the next 50 years. And what we do with the preserve is we have to ensure that everyone has access to Mare Island in general, particularly the preserve, especially our youth. And I think that's something that we need to work on. And last but not least, I do want to commend the city, Terrence, as well as yourself, for the work you all have done. I think that this is something that, like you said, is long overdue when it comes to continuing to move the Mare Island Preserve forward. I don't think that if you have to respond to every single rumor, then people who want to keep us working on nothing but rumors will just keep creating rumors. So I don't think that, in general, we can just continue to respond to every single rumor, though I commend you for trying to clear up some of the rumors, but now it's time to move forward, and we can't continue to look in the rearview mirror and answer every single question every single time someone comes up with tries to fill in the blanks when there's nothing. And I think that that's a big problem, and I don't want to see us continue to go down that road. We don't have the time to. The city of Vallejo deserves better than that. So that being said, thank you for this presentation, but moving forward, I don't want to see us responding to every rumor every time someone on Facebook creates a rumor. But I do want to see us working together with volunteers and people who care about the Mare Island Preserve who care about open spaces here in the city of Vallejo. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Liga.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the comments from the public. I have just a couple of questions. So, when you do the RFP, I want to know, is there going to be a panel who will review the RFP? And if there is, will that be from will community members be part of that review panel? And then if there is such a panel, I would like to ask that the panel be made up of diverse representatives from this community, not just from one group. The other item that I also wanted to address is, in the last 25 years, I was a parent in the Vallejo School District. And classrooms and teachers go on field trips. But in the 22 years that I've been a parent in the public schools in Vallejo, there was never a field trip to the Mare Island Heritage Preserve. I wonder why. Maybe there was lacking in outreach, or maybe it was not open to the kids. I have no idea why. Because we went to Angel Island, we went to San Francisco, we went to Muir Woods, but never in our local preserve. So again, moving forward, I think one of the things that a nonprofit, whoever that is, who will be running the preserve, that I would like for them to have a program that will do outreach to our local schools, the kids in our community, because that is such a gem that is really unknown. And it's, if our students in this community see it, they would be so proud. Hey, we do have a gem in this community, a preserve that not many of our young kids know. They don't have to travel to San Francisco or take the ferry to Angel Island, which they normally go to when they're in their 3rd or 4th grade, because I did that 3 times with my kids. But I always wondered, why never at the preserve? So that was something lacking. So that's moving forward. We want to make sure that that is included. The public outreach to our local schools is an item that I would want to make sure that that's included in the program that this new whatever contractor or nonprofit or new or current will be able to do. Okay, so that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Meissner.
Sorry, I was looking on my computer trying to find some information. So I was hoping, so the discussion of honey and the beekeeping out on the island. So, this is where I think people are having a hard time coming out and speaking, because if they're not supportive of what's going on out there, given the rumor mill that's going on, there's just been some not nice things said about people on Facebook. And so anyway, this person who is a professional beekeeper told me that the manner in which the bees are being kept on the island is actually in a manner that could spread diseases. I did share this with you already, Greg. I don't know if that's true or not. This is one person telling me. I know that she is a professional beekeeper. And I don't know what's going on the island. So, and Myrna mentioned that the beehives out there are going to be destroyed. I'm hoping that we could get, I don't know if this is possible, to get a state opinion, the state of California, because I've also been told that there's no license out there to keep bees, and the manner in which the hives are out there are a mess, frankly. I saw some pictures, and apparently those 55-gallon drums that are out there are full of honey. So I don't know if that's a rumor or not. It would be great to look into it, and because this is part of we need to make sure we understand what's out there, and if it's being managed well and it's meeting both local and state laws. So if that's something we can do, I'd be really grateful to make sure that it's happening in the way it should happen. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay, no other comments from council. This was
Mr. Mayor, may I just answer a couple questions that came up?
Right.
Thank you. I'm going to keep you till 11.
Really? Okay.
Never mind. You're the mayor. You get to decide that. So if I could just, a couple comments. I don't follow Facebook because I know what happens in my office. But there are times when I ask the folks that are monitoring it for us in social media to do that, because I think it's actually counterproductive to getting things done. And this city has such a bright future. I loved what the Bethel High School teacher, coach had to say. Vallejo isn't doing good, it's doing great. And I happen to believe that 100%. So I don't watch that. So Councilmember Brown, your comments about that, I couldn't agree with you more. And it goes not just for this issue, but for lots of issues. Progress is doing great for the city. We can't let all these little, I'll also call them petty arguments, get in our way of progress. When I looked at the list, so when you talked about, we did hold a community meeting. Most of the people that spoke here were there. We have a whole list of things. And I said from the beginning, I think we believe that the preserve should be used and preserved the same way for the same uses. And it was true. When we talked about the RFQ that we had on that May 28 presentation, it almost mirrored itself. So we're on the same page with what we all want to see in the preserve. So now it's just how do we bring that forward? I think that, so a few people have sent messages, because there's people on the other side of this conversation that say, what are you doing? And one of them was be candidly honest. So I hear all of you mention Get With Myrna user for the Flyway Festival. She canceled that. We didn't cancel that. We were fully prepared to support that opportunity. So I think sometimes when it needs to be factual information stated, that's one of those occasions where she canceled that. I didn't get a phone call on that. So happy to work with her, but the truth of the matter is we didn't cause that cancellation. But we're happy to follow through and see if she can, if she wants to re-up that conversation, we'll do the same thing we have in the past. The RFQ question was, who's going to review that, what timing that is. So we will put together that RFQ and we'll present it to the city council to review and take a look at, be available for the public to look at. We do need to keep it moving, so it's not going to, there will be people with different opinions. We can count on that. But certainly we'll have you look at that. And then we haven't actually established the review process. We'll get back to you certainly before that happens. At the end of the day, whomever is selected will be selected in a public meeting by this body with the public's input at the meeting. So there won't be any secret to whoever we select under an RFQ process to negotiate and talk about the future of Mare Island. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I want to close with this. This conversation we had this evening was an excellent conversation. Public got to make the statements that they wished. We were able to make our statements, and then Mr. Nyoff, you and your team did an outstanding job of putting this report together. Again, I encourage us to do more of this, that we report out at least once a month to the public so that they know what's going on with the preserve. With that, I thank you so much for putting this forward. This was a verbal report only. There's no action required. Next item on the agenda is the city attorney's report.
I don't have anything to report.
Okay, thank you. Next item is community forum.